It says already 7 o'clock. I started off the recording.
Thank you and welcome to everybody. And my name is Stephen Cummings and I'm Professor of Strategy at Victoria University of Wellington. But I also hold a number of visiting positions at different places. And one of the places is at Peking University in Beijing, and this is where I am right now. So thanks to the wonders of modern technology, this is being broadcast to you from Beijing. And I know that you're from various parts of the world as well. So it's a great thing that we can use this platform. What I'm particularly interested in, because I think it's very important, is how people communicate strategy. Because so often a lot of effort is put into developing a strategy, but it's not communicated well. And if it's not communicated well, then it really doesn't make the impact that it should. So the focus in this program is not just on learning about strategy theories and the latest approaches and some classic approaches as to how you can develop strategy, but also how do you communicate that? How do you engage people? How do you get people involved in strategy development? So the first thing that I want to do, and the first way that I want to get you involved and to get you typing in the comments section there, is if you can just think for a moment about what organization it is that you want to focus on. So every time that we talk about a strategy framework or a strategy idea, you can relate it to that organization. If all you do is read about case studies on Google and Apple and Uber and sort of famous companies, sometimes it doesn't really stick. So it's good that you've chosen something that is dear to you, that you have an interest in. And I think by doing that, it'll make it much easier to remember this stuff when the class is finished. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. What this will do is it'll bring up a document camera. So it's this thing here. You can see my hand on at the moment. You've all got a copy of this book now. The book is designed for people to write on it. So the book is really a workbook. And as I said earlier, often when we teach strategy, we tend to use textbooks that seem quite disconnected from reality. What we really want you to do is to get drawing this stuff and to get thinking about it, and I'll explain why. So off to a start by focusing on, if you like, that framework that kind of underpins all the other frameworks that we've been talking about. And I imagine it's a framework that you've heard of before, probably not something that is completely new to you. But effectively, the way that it's traditionally used is that you sit down and you think about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that face the organization that you're focusing on. So what I'm going to do as part of your first breakout is, hopefully Hamid has organized you into syndicate groups. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to give you about 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes to do this, is to get into your syndicate groups and decide on one of the organizations that you've chosen. Could be New World, could be New Zealand Police, one of the organizations that is owned, if you like, by one of the people in your syndicate groups. And I want you to do a little SWOT analysis on it. Okay, so think about what the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats are that face that organization. Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen now before we do that. We'll reconvene in about 25 minutes. If there are any questions or problems, you can put something in the chat and I can drop in, or myself can intervene. Okay, great, thanks. See you in a little while. Okay, I think we're all back. What I want to do now is talk about the strengths and weaknesses of SWOT, and perhaps you would have experienced those strengths and those weaknesses having done your little exercise in your group, so we can get your comments at the end about that. It is the world's most popular strategy framework, and it has been for 50 years. Now, there's probably not too many fields in the world where one framework or approach has, for 50 years, been the most used and the most popular framework. I mean, nearly 80% of companies and OECD countries use it consistently across all industries. However, not only is it the most popular in terms of people using it, it's also one of the most criticized. People feel that after they used it, they haven't really got much out of it. Okay, I think there's three main weaknesses with SWOT, and we'll deal with them one by one. The first problem with SWOT is that it's in the wrong order. And this is what 99% of people in almost every organization do. First, they think of the strengths, then they think of the weaknesses, then they think of the opportunities, then they think of threats. Now, that makes sense because that's the order in which the framework is presented. Of course, when you think about it, there's a problem in that when you're developing a strategy, because it's very hard to know what strengths and weaknesses are unless you've first figured out what the key opportunities and threats are that you face. And maybe you found this in your own analysis, that when you start to think about strengths, often it's unclear. And is being big, a big organization, is it a strength or a weakness? Well, unless you know what the opportunities and threats are, you probably think it's both. But maybe it would be more useful to do an OTSWA. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we should perhaps do an OTSWA analysis rather than a SWOT analysis, even though it doesn't sound anywhere near as good. Second weakness. What we tend to end up with SWOT, as we were talking about over here, is we end up with lists. The problem with that is that we don't really see how these things interact. Thirdly, third problem with SWOT, and I think this is why people find it disappointing in terms of it actually leading to something that you can implement, something that you can do, is that SWOT doesn't actually point anywhere. It's not aimed towards anything. And I think this is one of the main reasons why people find it disappointing. So there are these three main weaknesses with SWOT, and I would imagine that in doing your little group analysis that you might have experienced these as well. However, SWOT has one amazing strength, and that is the fact that it's so easy to remember and everybody knows it. It's only one strength, but it's a big one. You walk into every organization and everybody knows it. And there's a lot to be said for that. If you go in and try and teach people a whole new language, then that's going to take a lot of time and energy and probably going to lead to confusion. So in this course, this is what we do. The overarching framework of all of the frameworks that we look at is based on SWOT. But we're going to do it in such a way that overcomes those weaknesses. The first thing is to address the fact that it's in the wrong order. So at the start, we can begin by saying, well, let's focus on OTSWA rather than strengths. Let's think about opportunities and threats first. We should sort of think about what those things are in advance of doing anything else. We might figure out 3 or 4 main opportunities and threats. And if we can do that, that's going to make it a lot easier to organize and think about what the real key strategic strengths and weaknesses are. Second, how can we get beyond this fact that we end up with these lists? How can we sort of see how opportunities and threats combine with strengths and weaknesses? And that's actually not that difficult. If we sort of think of SWOT and then create a little hinge here, so we sort of make it into a box, and we organize our strengths and our weaknesses up above, opportunities and threats here. Now we can begin to almost, if you like, create a matrix where we look at how strengths and opportunities might combine, and strengths and threats might combine, and weaknesses and threats might combine with one another. We can start to look at how these things interrelate, because that's where the real strategic insight is. It's not just about listing these things. It's about asking ourselves, well, if we've got these opportunities, what are the strengths that are going to enable us to exploit those opportunities? Or what are the weaknesses that are going to make it difficult for us to take advantage of those opportunities? Or, if there are these threats, do we have the strengths to overcome those threats when we put those two together? We look at how they interact. Or if we've got a sort of a very difficult situation where the threats, really play into our weaknesses. And so they're very, very difficult things for us to overcome. So we need to think smartly about how maybe we can address those weaknesses. The third one is a bit of an issue for us. I mean, SWOT doesn't point anywhere. And I think really what we need to do at the outset of any strategy analysis, we can do it, it's not too difficult, is to actually figure out where it is that we want these combinations of strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats to aim towards. And I think what is very, very important in any organization, and I'll get you to do this for homework, but every organization's strategy needs to be pointed towards somewhere. And I think the most effective thing that it should be pointing towards, and it's explained in the book, is some idea of what winning looks like. I think the best expression of what a strategy does is that it should help an organization to win. Winning could mean anything. For some organizations, winning might mean a particular profit target, might mean making a particular amount of money. For some organizations, maybe a sports organization, it might mean winning the league. For a social sports team, winning might just be everybody getting together and having a great time. For a community group, winning could be serving the community in the best way that you can with the resources that you have. But often the problem with SWOT is that people rush into a SWOT analysis without first figuring out what it is that constitutes a win for the organization. What is this all aiming towards? What are we trying to achieve? So one of the things that I'm going to get you to do for homework is to think about the organization that you're looking at and ask yourself, well, what is, if we were to define what a winning statement is, or a vision of winning, if you like, and we put it up here, what would it be? Just something brief that we can kind of aim what we're doing towards. What about Melanie? Do you want to unmute and ask that question?
Yeah, but all I wanted to say was, why would you start with opportunities? I would have thought it would be more common to start with perhaps the threats.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a great idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen again, and I'll go back to the notes, because I think that's exactly the sort of thing that we're looking for, and it'll probably give us some good insights into expectations. So, okay, great question. Now, one of the things with any of these frameworks is that you don't have to respect the way that they're presented in the textbook. Actually, you know, a good example of that we looked at just a moment ago when we looked at the example of Hong Kong. This is what the Porter Diamond of International Competitiveness looks like in terms of how Michael Porter drew it. But in this analysis, the students that did this, based on a class that I ran in Hong Kong a few years ago, they moved some of the pieces around a bit. They liked the idea that if they put demand conditions and factor conditions together, that gave it sort of quite a nice way to think about opportunities and threats versus strengths and weaknesses. If you like, opportunities and threats may be presented here, and strengths and weaknesses presented there. Now, that's not the way that Michael Porter drew it. But I think what's really important in this course is that you learn the frameworks well enough that you can customize them, that you can develop them to suit the particular needs that you have. And I think it's a great idea to think about doing a TOES analysis, to actually do it: threats, opportunities, weaknesses, strengths, or to do it in any other way that you prefer. I think so often in organizations, people get constrained by the frameworks. If you know the frameworks well enough, then you can adapt them, you can customize them. But what I will say is thank you very much, and hopefully I get all of your names: Melanie, Jessie, Chloe, Julian, Karen, Vin, Amir, Jerome, Mara, Scott, Elham, Kara, and of course our fantastic assistant, technical wizard, Hamid. Thank you very much. Mara, just to reassure you, what we'll start off with next week is something where I can find out a bit more about you. So that'll, I think, be a good way to start things off next week. And yeah, thank you very much. It's very, very late at night there in Beijing. I think it is just coming up on 5:30. So I'll see you on Thursday. Okay? Great.
Thanks, Stephen.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen.
Thank you.
No worries.
That's been great.
Bye all.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.